from the National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
On May 25th, Ireland will go to the polls to make an important decision about the rights of unborn children. If Irish voters vote yes to repeal the 8th Amendment of the Irish Constitution, abortion will be nearly unrestricted in the country. This week on Register Radio, we talked to Dónal O'Sullivan-Latchford from Ireland EWTN to get the latest. But first, we are joined by Register contributor Carrie Gress to learn how to live the Blessed Mother's virtues, especially as we celebrate Mother's Day. I'm Jeanette DeMelo, editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio. I'm joined by Matthew Bunson in Washington, D.C., the Register's senior editor and co-host for Register Radio. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, and happy Mother's Day.
Of course, we're joined by Carrie Gress, who writes from the D.C. area. She writes regularly for the Register, and Carrie, we're very delighted to have you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
So recently you wrote a column about our Blessed Mother, and it was an interesting column with an interesting title, Finding Mary on the Inside. And when I first saw it, I said, what in the world does that mean? Finding Mary on the Inside. But in this very short column, you managed to pack in some very profound thoughts, and it's an intensely personal column. So what prompted you to write it?
You know, I don't normally like to write about myself. I feel like sometimes you feel sort of overexposed, maybe just the introvert in me. But this was a very personal piece because I feel like in many ways I'm hearing a lot of women echo what I felt for many, many years. And that is just the sense that it's really hard to feel like you have this close bond with Our Lady. And that was something that I knew intellectually, for 20 years, 25 years. I had a very slow conversion, but during that time, I really became convicted of Our Lady's importance. And so I started praying the rosary, and I think I had this intellectual connection with her, but I didn't have really an emotional one. And so it was always, for a very long time, I just was grappling with it. Like, what does this mean? Is there something broken in me? How do I feel like I'm actually closer to this woman whom I know exists, who I know is influential in my life? And so that's what really spurred it on, was just feeling like I was hearing this from a lot of other women, and, it wasn't just my own experience.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I kind of had the opposite experience of seeing my mother's relationship with the Blessed Mother, and kind of understanding that at an early age. But as I've grown older, and have kids, and it's almost harder sometimes for me now, actually, to say the rosary and to actually enter back into that relationship. I have to put images of Mary around me to remind me, oh goodness, she's with you here. She's been there, she's done that. So it's a wonderful reminder to read your journey. And you make an observation that I want to read to our readers. You write, one of the things I didn't realize was that my quest to understand Our Lady started even before I was married with children. It came to my attention that many of the things promoted by women in our culture, being outspoken, assertive, independent, and ambitious, weren't producing the kind of happiness I expected. What did you begin to understand? What did you see that wasn't satisfying?
I think, it really started. I had this series of boyfriends, and for one reason or another, our relationships ended, and then they all went on to marry school teachers. And I thought, what am I doing wrong? School teachers are great, but what's wrong with me? And so I started just really paying attention to what it was to music and what it was that men said about what they liked about women. And I recall vividly one conversation. I was working with George Weigel at that time, and one conversation that he was having with Michael Novak. I think we were all having lunch. And one of them said something to the effect that, oh, she's just the sweetest woman. And I remember just sitting, I'm sure you could probably see a thought bubble over my head that said sweet. And it was just one of these things where I thought, who does sweet? Like, what is that? I mean, it was just never, it hadn't crossed my mind, largely because it's just never promoted. In fact, it's almost kind of a dirty word among women. Yeah, it's just not something that's promoted. And so it really stuck with me, and as far as trying to understand that means and what kindness means and gentleness and compassion and charity and all of these things that women have done so well throughout the centuries and lived out Christian charity and Catholic virtue. And I think that was at the heart of it. What I really came to understand was my struggle with Our Lady focused around the fact that I didn't understand her virtues. I had just bought in so much into the culture and felt like I needed to be ambitious and outspoken and all of these other kinds of things that can work wonderfully with different personalities, but I just wasn't that personality, and I wasn't balancing it out with kindness and being sweet and even meekness, which is a totally misunderstood virtue in our day today. So it was really coming to know those things from the inside that I think helped me have this emotional connection with her that I certainly I didn't have at all prior to that.
Wow, Carrie, you and I have a lot in common. My husband, I remember before we were married, dating, he told me, "Oh, you're just so sweet." And I was like, no one has ever described me that way. I said, sweet is a flavor.
Exactly.
And now when I tell my kids they're sweet or whatever, he's like, no, sweet is a flavor. I understand now what he meant, that I just, like you were saying, couldn't understand then. So I totally understand where you're coming from. And speaking of kids and the fact that it's Mother's Day and how, of course, kids change us, women. How did kids affect your understanding of our Blessed Mother?
I think the one thing that I got, there's so many gifts that I've been given through my own motherhood, but one of them was just that realization that how Our Lady must love us, and just, how much we pour ourselves out for our children and seemingly limitlessly, and yet she loves us more than we love them. And so to have that kind of comparison, I think, was really a remarkable gift to me, to sort of feel that from the inside also. And I think, as you were mentioning too, just learning to from your own experience, learning to pray differently and kind of create this domestic church here, where I feel like I've got built into the day different ways to pray, to connect with her. I'm no longer, I can't get to daily mass every day like I used to. I don't get the adoration time like I used to. And so trying to build those back in and building the prayer time into my life at home, whether it's, bedtime when I'm laying down with one of my children or something like that, those pieces are still happening, and that relationship is still being built upon, but it's just in a different way.
Well, reading your piece, I'm struck by the fact that you have authored books on the Blessed Mother. Marian Consecration for Children is a new one. You've got the Marian Option. Did you ever imagine that you'd actually be writing so extensively on the Blessed Mother?
No, not at all. This has been a real surprise, and much of it started because I did write my dissertation for my doctorate when I had my children, and after that point it was like, well, if I can write a dissertation with 5 different languages and 300,000 words, I probably could write other books. And so that was sort of the jumping off point, because now it's really nice to write things without footnotes and all of that other things that go into a dissertation. But it's been a neat balance, and I think that's one of the other great things that I've gotten from motherhood is just again, finding those times to really chew on things throughout the day, because a lot of times some of the things you're doing, dishes and things like that, aren't really that engaging, so it's easy to kind of stew on other things. But yeah, it's I'm surprised that I've written this, especially the Marian Consecration for Children that was suggested to me several years ago, and I thought I can't write that book. And then when it came time to, it was just so much of my own experience poured into it, but also understanding children now. They love stories, and so I just pulled out all these great stories that they're already familiar with and kind of plugged them in to help them understand understand Our Lady and what Marian Consecration is, through these books that they've already read or have been read to them or that they might read in the future. And so that's been a fun thing to even go through with my own kids. We're doing the consecration right now, and it's been really fun just doing a consecration with language that I understand and they understand, and it's not too heavy like St. Louis de Montfort. I think can be inaccessible to a lot of people.
May is a perfect time. It's the month of Mary. It's a perfect time to really focus on teaching children something new about Mary. And a couple of years ago, let's see, my son's 4 now. He must have been 2, and he loves to sing. And so I decided I was going to teach him the Salve Regina. And he learned it. He knew how, at 2 years old, he knew how to sing the Salve Regina. And it was just an amazing experience to me of what children are capable of learning. So where can mothers get your book?
Tan Books published it, so you can get it there. You can get it on Amazon, all the regular places you can get books. But I think that was one of the fun things about the book was just we think we need to kind of dumb things down for children, and yet something like Marian consecration, which you can do every year, it kind of grows with the child. You could do it as a family, and that's what we're doing. It's so the younger kids, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old son. They sort of are left puzzled, but I know they're picking up things from it. And so it's just a fun and a great way to sort of build Catholic culture in your own family environment, as well as, just picking up new things that children absorb, even when we don't realize that they're absorbing it. It's definitely getting in there somehow.
So, Carrie, just as we wrap up, we still have a minute or so left. And I just wanted to conclude going back to some of those virtues that you highlighted in your piece, which is Finding Mary on the Inside, that can be found at ncregister.com. But what are some of the virtues of Mary that women today really do need to kind of wrap their mind around and let enter their hearts?
I think the first one is really to just recognize that God wants to have a deep relationship with us, and that we have to be open to hearing him. I think silence is something that we have so little of in our culture, and yet so much can happen in there. And I've really come to think of prayer very much, especially for women, very, very much like pregnancy, because often a woman will have an idea. It's a small seed, and then it grows, and she's the only one that knows about it, and then it grows and finally takes on a life all of its own. And I've had this experience in my own life, but you can see it in the mystics, St. Faustina, St. Margaret Mary. All kinds of mystics have had this experience where it's the spiritual life kind of bloom and grow in that respect. We can see it in Our Lady's life as well. So I think that's one thing, is just seeking out silence, because God really wants that kind of connection with all of us that's very very tailored to who we are and our own mission in life. But also just even things like being kind and compassionate and being focused on the needs of others. I think that's so often we sort of get the virtues of a narcissist, work on your own career and career advancement and all of this. But the funny thing is that we look at the studies. There's a great book that just came out called The Culture Code that talks about how the places that are thriving the most is that the places that feel like family, where people are compassionate. Absolutely. And are loving and looking out for the needs of others. And that's really what's going to build culture up in new and beautiful and dramatic ways and very creative ways. So I think those are some of the things that we can all look to, these different Marian virtues that we might not have thought of as Marian, but they certainly are.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. This has been a great conversation for me, and I refer our listeners to Carrie's other book, which is called The Marian Option, where you get a host of other examples of how to live the Marian way. When we come back, we talk to Dónal O'Sullivan-Latchford from EWTN Ireland about the upcoming referendum on abortion. More when we return.
Father Wade Menezes talks about the National Catholic Register.
As the National Catholic Register celebrates its 90th anniversary, I think that says a lot about the publication. It works. It's solidly Catholic. It presents the teachings of the Church, unabashedly so, and also guides its readers to be even more solidly Catholic themselves. One of the major effects that I think the Register has on its readers is that it elevates the intellect. Whether it be a faith item or a news item, it presents the news and the faith item in a very balanced way. One thing that the Register can never be accused of is being too far left or too far right. It is solidly Catholic, right in line with the Chair of Peter. And I think that says a lot about the Register. For a 6-issue free trial of the National Catholic Register, go to ncregister.com and click on the 6 free issue banner, or call 800-421-3230 for your 6 free issues. And as you await your first issue, enjoy some of our online content.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMelo, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register, and I'm joined by Matthew Bunson in D.C., who is a senior editor for the Register. And also joining us is Dónal O'Sullivan-Latchford from EWTN Ireland. Dónal, it's great to have you on.
Hi, Jeanette. Great to be here.
So Dónal writes for the Register regularly, giving us news that's happening in Ireland, and now we are looking at some very important news, which is the vote that will take place May 25th. The Irish voters will go to the polls to decide whether to repeal the Eighth Amendment, which is the part of the Constitution that prohibits abortion in Ireland. The country has taken this vote up various points in time, but this seems to be a pretty damaging referendum, one that would really lift almost all restrictions on abortion. So, Dónal, let's first talk about what the Eighth Amendment is. What does it actually say and do?
Sure, Jeanette. Well, the Eighth Amendment was a response from what was happening in the United States, what the Irish people here were seeing was happening in the United States, being brought in, abortion being brought in with Roe versus Wade. So I was going to say we thought, but it was before my time. Back in 1983, some conscientious individuals thought, look, the only way we can keep it out here, or the best way, is to insert it into our Constitution, a pro-life amendment. Now, that amendment, it's just a few words, what all the fuss is about. And it's that the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn, and with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable by its laws, to defend and vindicate that right. So that's what all the fuss is about. Now, heard there, it's an equal right to life.
Right.
From a doctor's point of view, the doctor is looking at not one patient, but two patients, with an equal standing. And what this referendum is proposing is that amendment will be obliterated, completely from the Constitution. So we're going from a situation where the unborn child had an equal right to life to his or her mother, to having absolutely no rights whatsoever in the Constitution. So it's an incredibly stark change.
Right.
And
Let's talk about how it came about. You covered an article for us, I think it was in February, that talked about where this referendum came from. And then, of course, we just revisited this week with an article on where things stand now. But who proposed this referendum?
Sure. There's always been pressure from, I suppose, fringe groups in the Irish Parliament to bring in abortion. And at the moment, we don't have a majority government, so that pressure is greater again. And but even before the last election, the signs have been bad for a number of years. The makeup of the Dáil of the Parliament here, it has become more and more pro-abortion. At the same time, it's a shock that things have got as bad as they've got so quickly, because if you go back to, say, 2011, you had the leaders of the main political parties saying, look, we're not going to do anything about this. And that's gone to suddenly today, a situation where we're looking at abortion on demand, effectively, particularly for the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. But they brought it in with a few Trojan horses, There was a so-called citizens' assembly, 100 people selected, and they discussed the Eighth Amendment with the assumption that it was a problem. That was the opening working assumption, and the emphasis was on what can we do to fix this problem. And they made proposals which were then taken up by a special all-party government committee, and they essentially took up the proposals of the Citizens' Assembly, and then the government essentially took up those proposals and said, okay, we're going to have a referendum. But the feeling, among pro-life politicians and others, that this process wasn't transparent, it wasn't fair. It was basically, the outcome was predetermined, essentially. And, there's a lot of ill feeling, if you like, about that here. And that's it in a nutshell. So we've come to the situation now where in just a few weeks' time, people are going to be asked to vote on something they should never be asked to vote on.
Right.
We're not usually asked to vote on taking away somebody else's rights, and yet that's what's happening here. There's still, I think, a certain sense of shock about that pro-lifers.
Well, this has become controversial not only because of what's actually being proposed in this referendum, but also because of what's obvious now is the interference from foreign money, foreign interest groups, and foreign lobbyists. Who's been investing in this, and what are they after?
That's right. A lot has been said about money from the George Soros Foundation, and that having an influence, over the amendment and the support of certain groups for it. It goes further than that. I mean, I was just talking for another article the other day, to one of the architects of the Eighth Amendment, and they were talking about, this population control agenda underlying things here. And, it's strange. They're trying to bring in this on the basis of hard cases, and which would account for just a tiny proportion of all abortions. And yet it's essentially, abortion without restriction, first 12 weeks when most abortions take place anyway.
So, Dónal, to recap some of what you have written about in your most recent article, you kind of summarize the government's plan, and that this first part of the plan is to actually repeal the Eighth so that they make way to actually allow for abortion laws. And as you've referenced, these abortion laws actually are quite wide. They're not very restricted. You've spoken about having an abortion for any reason up to the 12th week, but the provisions that are being talked about go all the way up to what could possibly be partial birth abortion, if it is deemed that the mother's health or well-being is being threatened. Do I have that correctly? I want to make sure I'm articulating this.
You have it correctly. There's so much being thrown at us so quickly in this that a lot of people aren't aware of this. It's almost like people are traumatized and they haven't been able to digest all the information. But even if those laws weren't passed, by the assembly here, our upper and lower houses, we would still be in a very bad situation, because the fact that there would be no rights for the unborn child in the Constitution.
Right.
Could, in theory, have people saying, "Okay, look, I want to have an abortion. I have all the rights. An unborn child has no rights." So regardless of there being no law,
it sets a precedent, right?
Constitution says I can have this.
Right. So I want to turn to what has the resistance been, especially first of all from the church. So what has the church done to help people understand what is at stake here? Well,
just recently they put out a number of individual bishops have been putting out pastoral letters about this, and as you would expect, they have been very strong. One bishop, Bishop of Killaloe, was talking about, this idea that you would even be voting on something like this, on a human right, how terrible that is. And there is an attempt to get across the gravity of what's in these proposals. But I mean, I suppose as with we have problems with media here, so a bishop will be listened to, highlighted when he's saying something maybe that isn't the main thing he wants to get across, but when he maybe says something very well and very clearly about abortion, it isn't highlighted to the effect that to the extent that it should be.
The sources in your story make clear that there's been a media bias. But, I want to focus in, because we have, maybe 3 minutes or so left to our show. And I really want to focus in on the prayer initiatives that are happening, because aside from the bishops trying to get their message out, which is hard, There's also, and you've written a lot about this, there's prayer. And there's quite a resistance from pro-lifers just in the sense of praying for what is at stake.
That's right.
Let's talk about the prayer initiatives.
Yeah, there's a wonderful sense of prayer initiatives multiplying the closer we get to the date. Now, led by Archbishop Eamon Martin, who's encouraging, this is the successor to St. Patrick, and he's encouraging us to pray the rosary. EWTN in Ireland itself has launched a Rosary for Ireland initiative, and it's a 54-day novena, if you like, and we're appealing for everyone to join us. The initiative has started, but you can start at any time. Just one Hail Mary, even, and Aidan Gallagher is. He's keen to highlight St. Louis de Montfort's words on that. He says, few Christians, however enlightened, know the real price, merit, excellence, and necessity of the Hail Mary. Mm-hmm. So it's what we really need at the moment. We see that we're up against it. We're up against the forces of abortion, the forces of evil. And we know it can only be defeated in prayer. And that's really been the overwhelming response. I'm on the receiving end of lots of messages saying, look, there's a new prayer initiative starting tomorrow. People are asking for prayer here. May 13, of course, is a big day, for atonement for Ireland. So we would just plead really to add your prayers, join with us.
Absolutely. So the people here and everywhere can join in the prayers, as you've mentioned, especially on May 13th, which is a Sunday this year, but it's the day that not only Mother's Day, but the Our Lady of Fatima. It's a day we remember her, and we can and call forth her prayers. Of course, May 25th is the feast day of, or the birthday of Padre Pio, and so we can ask him for prayers as well. Dónal, thanks for reporting on this important message, this important vote. We'll be with you in prayer. Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online. Don't forget to look for our podcast. Thanks for joining us on Register Radio here on EWTN. For Matthew Bunson and our producer, Jeff Burson, I'm Jeanette DeMelo. Until next week, God bless you.